Ever get that feeling, you know that one, like you're being watched?
Oh, I know that feeling.
Yeah. Well, today's deep dive might just confirm those suspicions.
Oh.
We're talking about SS7,
SS7.
a global network most people have never even heard of,
Right.
but one that's absolutely, totally essential to how our phones work.
Yeah, it's like the invisible nervous system of global communication.
Yeah.
Just quietly routing calls and texts behind the scenes. Most people, they don't even know it exists.
And we're not just talking about some, I don't know, some obscure technical system here. We're talking about a system with vulnerabilities
Yeah.
that are so serious they could potentially allow someone to track your movements, listen to your calls,
Right.
even disable your phone remotely. And I mean,
That's not hyperbole.
no, not at all.
Not at all.
Our deep dive today is based on a fascinating,
Yeah.
if somewhat alarming,
Yeah.
collection of sources. We've got investigative journalism, we've got technical analyses, government reports,
Yeah.
and even a whistleblower account.
Wow.
All of these are pointing to the very real risks posed by SS7 exploits.
Yes.
And you know me, I love a good headline.
Right.
And one document in our stack really caught my eye. The title was just too good to pass up. It was called SS7, Locate, Track,
Yeah?
Manipulate. You have a remote-controlled tracking device in your pocket.
I mean,
Kitschy.
right.
It is. From a 2014 presentation at the Chaos Communication Congress,
Okay.
a well-known tech and security conference.
Right.
And, you know, it might sound like something out of a spy thriller,
Yeah.
but it raises some really disturbingly plausible scenarios.
About how SS7 vulnerabilities could be exploited.
And it's not just theoretical.
Right.
I mean, we've got these other sources, news reports, investigations, official statements that suggest this stuff is actually happening.
It is. We're not just talking about hypothetical risks here. Real people,
Right.
including journalists and activists, are believed to have been targeted using SS7 exploits. But to understand why these vulnerabilities exist, we need to kind of,
Yeah.
take a quick trip back in time to the origins of SS7.
Okay, time travel it is. Set the controls for the 1970s. What was going on in the world of telecom back then?
Well, for starters, mobile phones were about as big and clunky as bricks.
Right.
More importantly, the telecom landscape was a collection of what we call walled gardens.
Walled gardens.
So each country, sometimes even each region, had its own closed-off network.
Okay.
So to connect calls and messages between these networks, obviously a new system was needed.
Enter SS7, the great unifier of the telecom world.
Exactly. SS7, it was designed to facilitate communication between all these different networks, enabling things like international roaming and mobile billing.
Yeah.
Revolutionary system at the time, but here's the catch. It was built on a foundation of trust.
Trust. Like, hey, I trust that other telecom operator across the world not to do anything shady with my data trust.
Exactly.
Okay.
Back then, it was a much smaller, more tightly controlled industry. Operators, they generally knew and trusted each other. Security, not a major concern. No one could have foreseen how much the telecom landscape would change, or how interconnected and vulnerable it would become.
Right. Fast forward to today, and we've got smartphones in every pocket, billions of devices connecting to the internet, a whole industry built around collecting and monetizing data.
And that's where the cracks in SS7's foundation start to show. Because that implicit trust that underpinned the system, it's a liability in today's world. Especially, given the information we have in that SS7security.pdf from our stack about how easily vulnerabilities can be introduced as these networks interconnect with all these third parties.
So this old school system, built on good old-fashioned handshakes and trust, is now trying to navigate a world of digital espionage, cybercrime, mass surveillance.
Yeah.
Not exactly a recipe for success, is it?
Not at all. To put it simply, SS7 was never designed to handle the complexities and threats of the modern digital landscape.
Okay, so we've got this system, SS7, that's essential to how our phones work.
Right.
But wasn't built for the security challenges of today. I'm already starting to feel a little uneasy.
And it's about to get a whole lot uneasier.
Oh, no.
Because now that we understand the historical context, we can kind of delve into how SS7 actually works and, more importantly, how those vulnerabilities can be exploited.
All right, let's unpack this SS7 thing a bit further, but please, try to keep it jargon-free. We want our listener to actually understand what's going on, not just be bombarded with technical terms.
Absolutely. Imagine SS7 as a global air traffic control system, but for phone calls and text messages.
Okay.
So every time you make a call or send a text, SS7 messages are flying back and forth behind the scenes,
Right.
routing your communication to its destination.
So it's like the invisible infrastructure that makes our mobile world go round.
Precisely. But here's the crucial part. Those SS7 messages, the ones directing all the traffic, they're often sent without strong authentication. Think of it like an air traffic controller receiving instructions from someone who hasn't properly identified themselves.
Okay, that does not sound good.
It's a major, major security flaw because without proper authentication, it becomes relatively easy for someone with malicious intent. I mean, it could be a hacker, it could be a spy agency, it could even be a rogue telecom employee.
Oh, wow.
To essentially impersonate a legitimate network and inject themselves into the process.
Wait a minute, are you saying someone could hijack my calls or texts just by sending fake SS7 messages?
In a nutshell, yes. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. With unauthorized access to SS7, an attacker could potentially track your location, intercept your calls and messages, even disable your phone completely.
Okay, that's officially terrifying. I'm starting to think a landline and a carrier pigeon might be the only safe way to communicate.
I understand the feeling. But before we spiral into a digital panic here, let's break down some of these specific vulnerabilities and how they could be exploited. We'll start with the one that's probably most unsettling. Location tracking.
Because who needs privacy anyway?
Right.
But seriously, this is where I imagine most people would start to get really creeped out.
Absolutely. And it's not unfounded fear. Remember that document with the attention-grabbing title, SS7, locate, track, manipulate.
The one about the remote-controlled tracking device in our pockets. Hard to forget that one.
Right. Well, that document goes into detail about how attackers can exploit SS7 to pinpoint a phone's location with remarkable accuracy. They trick the network into revealing which cell tower your phone is connected to.
And once they know which tower you're connected to, it's just a matter of cross-referencing that with publicly available cell tower maps, and boom, they know where you are.
Exactly. And in densely populated areas where cell towers are closer together.
Right.
That location tracking can be incredibly precise. I mean, often down to a few meters.
So even if you're trying to maintain some semblance of privacy, your phone could be betraying you without you even knowing it.
It's a sobering thought. And keep in mind, that's just one example of how SS7 vulnerabilities can be exploited. We haven't even touched on call and message interception yet.
Don't tell me there's more.
Oh, there's more. But we'll save that for after the break. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were starting to peel back the layers of SS7. You know, that global network most people don't even know exists, but one that plays a critical role in our digital lives.
We've established that SS7 is essentially this invisible messenger that connects mobile networks worldwide, allowing us to make calls, send texts, use our data plans internationally.
But, and it's a big but, we've also established that this system, designed in a bygone era of walled gardens and implicit trust, is riddled with vulnerabilities that make it a potential target for hackers, spies, anyone else looking to exploit our personal data.
And one of the most unsettling aspects of these vulnerabilities is the ability to track someone's location with a high degree of accuracy just by exploiting weaknesses in SS7.
We talked about how attackers can essentially trick the network into revealing which cell tower a phone is connected to. And from there, it's a relatively simple process to pinpoint that phone's location on a map.
Right. And that's just using basic SS7 messages. It gets even more invasive when you start talking about something called CAMEL.
Camel, as in the animal with the hump. What do camels have to do with phone surveillance?
Not those kinds of camels. CAMEL stands for Customized Applications for Mobile Network Enhanced Logic. It's a system built on top of SS7 that allows network operators to offer customized services to their roaming customers.
Okay, so far it doesn't sound too nefarious.
On the surface, no. CAMEL is how you can get things like special roaming rates, call forwarding while abroad, or even access to location-based services. It's designed to enhance your mobile experience.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
You know me too well. The problem is that, in the wrong hands, those CAMEL capabilities can be twisted for much more nefarious purposes.
Give us the rundown. How does CAMEL go from helpful travel companion to spy tool?
Well, remember that remote-controlled tracking device in your pocket.pdf document we mentioned earlier? It highlights how easily CAMEL can be exploited for surveillance. An attacker can use SS7 to impersonate your home network, essentially tricking your phone into thinking it's communicating with its trusted provider.
So my phone gets fooled into thinking everything is hunky-dory, but in reality, it's sending information to some random hacker halfway across the world.
You've got it. It's like a digital con game. Your phone gets tricked into diverting your calls, texts, even location data to the attacker system, all because of weaknesses in SS7 and Camel.
Okay, I'm officially creeped out. This isn't just some theoretical vulnerability. We're talking about real-world exploits with potentially serious consequences.
Exactly. And we've got the sources to back it up. Remember those investigative journalism pieces we mentioned?
Yeah, we've got a whole stack of them.
Right. Those reports, they offer a glimpse into how SS7 exploits have been used in the wild. And let me tell you, it's not pretty.
Hit me with the most shocking case first.
Right.
I need something to make my jaw drop.
All right. Prepare to be chilled. One of the most unsettling examples comes from an article about Deutsche Telekom, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the world. They recently committed to this new industry code of conduct aimed at preventing SS7 abuse.
That sounds like a positive step, right?
It is, but what's really disturbing is the context. The article mentions the 2022 assassination of Freited Roman, a prominent Mexican journalist known for his coverage of organized crime and political corruption.
Okay, so we've got a murdered journalist. What does that have to do with SS7?
It's not confirmed, but the article strongly suggests that SS7 geolocation may have been used to track Roman's movements in the days leading up to his death. Remember how we talked about how SS7 exploits can pinpoint a phone's location with scary accuracy?
Yeah, it's like having a homing beacon in your pocket.
Exactly. And in Ramon's case, that homing beacon may have led his assassins right to him. He was shot dead getting into his car.
That's horrifying. It makes this whole SS7 thing all too real. Suddenly, we're not just talking about some abstract privacy violation. We're talking about life and death.
Precisely. And that's just one case. We also have a report from The Guardian and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism that delves into this shadowy world of surveillance tech companies. They uncovered evidence suggesting that an Israeli firm called NSO Group may have gained access to the global telecoms network through a mobile operator in the Channel Islands.
Channel Islands, isn't that where rich people go to hide their money?
Among other things, yes. But what's important in this context is that the Channel Islands, while technically not part of the UK, fall outside of many international regulatory frameworks.
Oh, okay.
This makes them attractive to companies like NSO, who operate in the gray areas of surveillance technology.
So they set up shop in a regulatory haven and then exploit weaknesses in global systems like SS7 to spy on people.
That's the implication. And it gets even more concerning when you consider that these companies often sell their services to governments, including some with less than stellar human rights records.
Okay, this is starting to feel like something out of a spy thriller. But we're talking about real people's lives here, their privacy, their safety. So what are governments doing about this? Surely someone is trying to rein in these vulnerabilities.
There have been some efforts to address the issue, but it's a complex landscape with no easy solutions. The GSMA, a global trade association for mobile operators, has developed a global title leasing code of conduct in an attempt to prevent telecom companies from leasing out SS7 access to just anyone.
That's a step in the right direction.
It is, but the problem is that it's voluntary. Not every company will sign on, and enforcing those guidelines is a whole other challenge.
So it's like asking a fox to guard the hen house and hoping for the best.
In a way, yes. Plus, there's the added complication of government agencies themselves exploiting SS7 for their own surveillance purposes.
Wait, are you saying governments are spying on their own citizens using this system?
It's a legitimate concern. In fact, we have a letter in our stack from U.S. Senator Ron Wyden, a vocal advocate for privacy rights. He sent it to the FCC chairman back in 2018, expressing alarm over SS7 vulnerabilities, stating that they pose a major national security threat.
Senator Wyden doesn't mince words, so if he's concerned, that's definitely a red flag.
Absolutely. And his concerns were echoed in a 2019 report from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which found evidence of SS7 exploits being used all over the world, from tracking the movements of political dissidents to intercepting the communications of journalists and activists.
So this isn't just a problem in countries with authoritarian regimes. It's happening everywhere.
Exactly. And it's not just governments either. We also have a report from Al Jazeera detailing how NSO Group, the infamous Israeli spyware firm behind the Pegasus spyware, allegedly tried to gain access to a U.S. mobile security company's signaling network by offering them bags of cash.
NSO Group. Those are the guys who were caught selling spyware to governments that used it to target journalists and human rights activists.
The very same. And this whistleblower account suggests they were willing to pay top dollar to get their hands on SS7 access, which gives you a sense of just how valuable this kind of access is in the world of surveillance.
Okay, we've talked about how vulnerable SS7 is, and we've laid out some pretty disturbing examples of how those vulnerabilities have been exploited. But let's bring it back to our listener. What does this all mean for everyday people? What are the real-world consequences of these SS7 flaws?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? Think about all the sensitive information that flows through your phone, your online banking details, your personal conversations, your location data. With SS7 vulnerabilities, all of that is potentially at risk.
I'm starting to feel like I need to wrap my phone in tinfoil.
I understand the sentiment, but unfortunately it's not that simple. There are no foolproof solutions, but there are steps we can take to mitigate the risks.
Okay, give us something to work with here. What can people actually do to protect themselves?
Yeah.
Short of throwing away their phones and becoming hermits.
We'll dive into that right after the break. Don't touch that dial.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've gone pretty deep into SS7, that invisible network that keeps our phones buzzing. But, well, it seems like it also leaves us open to some pretty unsettling intrusions.
It's been eye-opening, even for someone like me, and I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff. The potential for abuse here is very real.
Right, we've gone from what is SS7 to, wait, someone could be listening to my calls pretty quickly. But hey, knowledge is power, right? At least that's what we tell ourselves as we uncover these, what do we call them, digital landmines.
True, though. Understanding how these systems work, where those vulnerabilities are hiding, and who might be motivated to exploit them, that's the first step towards reclaiming some control in this world where tech often feels like it's operating totally beyond our grasp.
Okay, so for our listener who's been out there, diligently taking notes, maybe even putting on a tinfoil hat as we speak, what's the big takeaway from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to remember that convenience we all enjoy, being able to just call, text, connect with anyone, anywhere, anytime, well, it comes at a price. We sacrifice a degree of privacy and security, and we don't even realize it.
Because most of us never even think about those systems that make it all possible. Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. But what we don't know can hurt us. It's like building a house on a foundation of sand and then being surprised when a storm hits.
So what do we do? I mean, do we just accept that our privacy is eroding? That our data is up for grabs? That our phones are basically tracking devices that we're willingly carrying around?
It doesn't have to be hopeless, but it needs a shift in mindset, Both individually and as a society, we need to demand more transparency from these tech companies, more accountability from governments.
Because right now, it really does feel like we're playing defense, constantly reacting to the latest data breach or privacy scandal. How do we flip the script?
By staying informed and engaged. Refuse to be complacent. Don't be afraid to call up your mobile provider. Ask them what they're doing about these SS7 vulnerabilities. We need to push for legislation that actually protects our digital privacy. Support organizations that are in the trenches, fighting for a more secure and just digital future for all of us.
It's about, like you said before, reclaiming some of that power.
That's it. And remember, every movement starts with individuals. Speaking up, raising awareness, demanding better.
I love that. It's not about being some tech expert, a cybersecurity guru. It's about being an informed citizen, especially in the digital age.
Exactly. And sometimes it's about making different choices, supporting the companies, even if they're smaller, that prioritize security and privacy, even if it means spending a bit more or it's a little less convenient.
Because the question we're all left with is, in a world that's so reliant on our phones, on all this tech, how much privacy are we willing to sacrifice just for that convenience?
The million-dollar question. And unfortunately, no easy answers. But by even having this conversation right here, right now, shining a light on these vulnerabilities, I think we're taking a step in the right direction.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's about all we have time for on this episode of The Deep Dive. To our listeners, thank you as always for joining us for this deep dive. This one was a doozy. Stay curious, stay informed, and maybe, just maybe, think twice before you answer that call from a number you don't recognize.